Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another repair video for you. And in this repair video, well, we have something unique and special from Eric the Car Guy. This is probably my first foray into body repair. This is my 1993 Acura Vigor, and for those of you that have seen the introduction video to this, well, you know that the body is a bit rough on this car. So much so that I did another video about finding water leaks using this exact vehicle, and this is what I found. I found holes here and here in the trunk. As a result, water just pretty much pours into the trunk and ruins everything in there. Not wanting to continue with that, I want to repair that here today. Now, I've consulted with a good friend of mine, Donnie Smith, who has a channel that does bodywork videos. And his suggestion to me was to go in here and cut out all the affected metal and weld in new metal. And that would be the ideal situation if this car were not a $500 car. That would be the preferred repair, so to speak. Actually, the preferred repair with this thing, I would say it would be to replace this whole quarter. But if you've priced out quarter panels, if you can even find them for this vehicle, you'll find that they are way expensive and far exceed the value of this vehicle, in my opinion. So that's not going to happen. That being said, those of us that like to get by, well, I believe I have a repair that does address the issue and will get you by, but will probably not be a permanent forever and ever repair. I've used this on floor pans in the past. It's sort of a quick and dirty way of doing some body work and filling in areas to where you don't need, where it's not necessarily going to be seen. As you can see, this whole area here is going to be covered up by the bumper, so we're not going to see what happens behind it once I'm done. So I'm not really concerned about the cosmetic aspect of it. So without further ado, why don't we jump in and get a closer look at what I'm about to do and get this done. I'll show you a quick and dirty way to do body work. Okay, here's our damaged area here, looking out from inside the trunk. There's a vent that is normally in this area, and as you can see, it's completely rotted away here. The plan is to come in here and cut out the severely rusted parts, and then I'm going to come in with some body filler using a technique that I'm about to show you to try to fill this in. In addition to that, I'm also going to try to get this hole up here filled at the same time, because I believe actually that's where most of the water is coming in, from behind the tail light. I think my first step is to basically find out what I've got, what I'm working with here. So I'm going to take this wire wheel, so to speak, on my angle die grinder and clean off as much rust and paint as I can so I can see what I've got to work with. This is the vent that goes in place down in there, and it fits in here like this. Now there's one screw that holds it on here and one screw that holds it on this side. So in essence, I just need to fill in this gap here. I've been doing some thinking since I was doing the cleaning here, and that is, yes, this metal is useless and rusted away. However, for my purposes, it works as kind of a template for what I need. This is a really odd shape in here, so it's not a straight shape at all. It's not like it needs to be, because as I said, this is all behind the bumper skin anyway, but when I go to put this back in, the only thing I really need is some structure here that I can run the screw into and also make it so that it's watertight. That's all I'm really going for here. And I think I'm just gonna come in and get rid of like the small pieces like this and just leave the rest there as somewhat of a structure. I'm not going to be using traditional body filler with this. I'm going to be using something called Tiger Hair, is a name brand that's used, but also mine is called Fiber Strand. And what it is it's not necessarily traditional body filler that's just straight up filler. It actually contains little bits of fiberglass to give it a little more structure, a little more rigidity. And for doing repairs like this is what I suggest you use. I don't suggest you use just regular body filler. And then we're going to coat it with some rust inhibitor before I even start. That basically turns any rust that's left into a harder metal and pretty much stops the rust from continuing at that point. At least that's the hope. Before I go in and trim out that rust hole there, another thing that I want to do to prepare the hole that's actually above the taillight here is it looks like something actually came through the metal from the outside to the inside and bent the metal outward, or inward I should say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hammer that metal back into place as much as possible before I apply the filler. That way there's more metal there to provide more structure behind our repair. All right, before I did this, I just noticed something. You can see, actually now with the light underneath here, that body seam has also been compromised, so I'm gonna have to fill that as well. I just have to be careful. If you come down here a little bit, you'll see this other hole. That's actually part of what holds the back bumper on. So this hole is supposed to be here. So any sealing that I do here, I wanna make sure to protect that hole. All right, now I've almost got this flattened out, but what I'm gonna do to flatten it out as much as possible is I'm gonna use 2 hammers. And I'm gonna use one kind of like an anvil on one side so that I can hammer onto it, and I'll hold this one in from the back side. So I'll hold this other hammer in through the back side so that I can hammer this one onto the front and get this little piece of metal down a little flatter. I really didn't trim all that much off of here. Like I said, I'm going to use it as my structure. I'm going to stress this 1,000 times over. This is a $500 car. This is hack body repair. This is not an actual repair. If you want actual repairs, check out my friend Donnie Smith's channel down in the description. You can see how to do body work properly as opposed to what I'm doing here. What I'm doing here will get you by in the driveway. That's about it. This step, we are going to take the rust inhibitor, and I'm just going to go around this area here, and I'm also going to go up in this area here. That way any rust that's left, hopefully we will stop it in its tracks. In fact, I'm going to go in and wipe this off with a rag to make sure that there is no more dust or particles on here so that this stuff has a nice surface to attach to. I'm going to do the back side too. Right, now our rust inhibitor has had a bit of time to cure up. Really, I read the instructions on the bottle and it said you weren't really supposed to start doing any work with it until you've waited for 24 hours. I'm not going to do that. My next step is to fill in this area. Now, I have my fiber strand that I spoke of earlier, aka also known as tiger hair, and also I have my activator as well. It's an older can, but I went in, I mixed it up, everything looks good in there. Now, I've got a piece of cardboard sitting here that I'm going to do my mixing on. This will be my little mixing buddy here. You need to figure out how much will fill this space. What I'm using here is a paper floor mat, and I'm going to try to get it into about that shape. Roughly shape it up about like this. So once I get my filler mixed up, I'm going to put it on this piece of paper. And then I'm going to reach through the trunk and reach through the front, and I'm going to push it together like a sandwich, like this. And I'll let it cure like that, with paper on it and everything. And that will, in essence, seal this whole area up. And this is kind of why I wanted to keep all those little bumps and imperfections and even that rust that's still there. Because this way I can come in here and sort of feel my way around and push the filler together and make my own little, basically, filler sandwich inside of here. And then I'll come back and I'll cut out this excess so that I can put my trunk vent back into place. At least that's the plan. We'll see how that actually works out. Okay, now it's time for our body filler. Now, with body filler, you only have so much time to work. So you don't want to mix up too much filler that you're not able to use it all in your working time, or else you're just wasting filler. So it's much better to do little bits at a time. I am going to do a little bit here. As far as proportions go, Ed China says a golf ball size filler to a pea size of the activator. Body filler comes in 2 parts. So you've got the body filler itself, and then you've got the activator here. Once you mix the 2 together, they begin to cure, and it happens rather rapidly. So you want to make sure that you have your plan laid out. You want to make sure you have your surface pressed. You want to make sure that you're ready for this when you do this. You know, I keep looking at that thinking I might have cut more out, but I'm not going to worry about it. This has a very distinctive odor. I'm going to go with Let's see, I'm gonna need a little more than that, I think. There we go, I'm gonna use about that much, and hopefully that's gonna fill that space. So with that much filler, that's about a golf ball and a half, I think. So I'm gonna go for a rather large P, about that much. All right, now I'm ready for my transfer to my paper. Just gonna put it right in the center like that. So I'm gonna sneak in the back here with this paper, hold that in there like that, and then come in with my filler in this angle. Are you ready? We're ready. And squeeze. You sort of work it around. Like I said, this works extremely well if you've got a hole in your floor. I've used it for that in the past, and it's worked out awesome. Because there you don't have to worry about how pretty it is. It's under the carpet, who cares? I'm just gonna try to match the structure as much as I can from the paper before it cures up, because once it cures, that's it, there's no going back. And no, this is not an advertisement for Castro. It just happens to be the floor mats that I had. While this is curing up, I figured just for the sake of economy of movement, I will also come in and fill these areas. Now, remember this body seam and this body seam have lost their filler, if you will, so I'm gonna fill that in addition to filling in this crack. I don't need a lot of fluid for this one. I'd say that should be good. I know having the same color activator as I do the filler, I should have gone for orange or something. That probably would have worked a little better. But the reason why you have the different colors is so that you can tell when it's fully mixed. Remember, sometimes with this, I might have to do a little bit of sanding, so you don't want to have it gooped up so much that you have so much sanding to do after the fact. You almost want to sculpt it and be done with it. And that way you've got very little sanding to do. That's sort of the trick to bodywork, I think, is minimizing your time sanding. It looks sealed anyway, and that's what we're here to do. Ooh, got a little bit in my screw hole. Don't block off your screw hole. Well, we're back, and looks like the material has hardened up well, and now I suppose it's time for the big reveal to see how well I did. So, the paper may not peel off completely, and that's okay. Because, yeah, like this. All I'm looking to do is create an area, like I did here, and this in the back also. So all that rust is now fiberglass. And I still have some more work to do back here, but I knew I was going to have to do a little bit more work anyway. But for the most part, I have new material in here that will seal it off, which is what I aimed to do. What I needed to do was get this sealed in here so that there was no more water intrusion. Now I'll come back in and fill these spots in. But I think for the most part we're done. And you might want to look at the other side also, because what happens when I do this, when you squish it together like a sandwich, is you'll have a centerpiece, but then you'll have sort of an overlap on both sides, so it sort of locks itself in. And as I said, this type of repair is ideal for like a floor pan, someplace that you're not going to see. For something like this, it's behind the bumper skin. Nobody's ever going to see it anyway, and it's structural, meaning I'm trying to keep out water. I think mission accomplished as far as that goes. And now let's come in here, and I'm going to cut out this section to more closely match the trunk vent, and we'll be done with this. For the next phase, I'm going to come in and I need to cut out the rest of the opening to put the trunk vent back into place. In order to do that, I think probably the easiest method is just sort of stick it in place like this, and I'm going to draw around it with my Sharpie to try to mock its opening and its location here. And if I need to fudge it around, I can. But I think Well, looks like it should be a little bit larger than that. The time for cutting has arrived, and this is fiberglass. And when you cut fiberglass or do any sanding, body work, that type of thing, you're going to have small little particles of things in the air. You want to keep those things out of your lungs. Do so with a mask. I have been able to cut the opening so that I can now insert this vent back in. It's a little more snug than it used to be, but there's one last piece to the puzzle, and that I need to drill a hole for the screw to go into. And to do that, I'm simply just going to point it in that general direction. Looks like we got ourselves a trunk vent. I'm going to come back in, do a little more cleaning up of this area, and get it all ready for, I've got a little bit of primer and a little bit of paint. Even though this is behind the bumper, I'm still going to prime and paint it so that it's there. Plus, I went up into this corner a little bit. So I'm going to finish out all that work and come back. Basically, it's thin layers sanding, whole lot of sanding, primer at the end, and then paint. By the way, I'm using an 80 grit sandpaper just to rough it out, because I'm still going to go over it again with another coat to fill in the rest of these holes. But this will get it roughed out so that I can actually go in and do my finished layer. Now that I've smoothed this out a little bit, I'm going to come in and put a skim coat of filler. I'm going to use the same fiberglass stuff instead of body filler because once again it's got that structure to it. Fill in all these little holes and things, and I'm also just going to put a skim coat on this real quick, this corner. It'll just be real easy to do. That way I can just sand that out, and hopefully it'll be ready for some primer and some paint soon. Okay, the filler has had some time to cure. It's hardened up now. I'm going to go back in and do a light sand just really in this area. I'm just sort of going to touch on these areas in here just to smooth them out. But all this stuff is not seen, so I'm not really concerned about it. This was all just sealing a water leak. But I do want to sand this one up so that it does have a smoother finish, so that when I go to throw some paint on it, it looks like it's supposed to be there. Now the paint that I have is not the same color, but it's close enough and it'll pass. And I can't stress enough how we're just working on a $500 car here. Think of it as such. I'm going to use some 100 grit sandpaper for this part just to smooth it out. I'm not going to do it really hard, but that's what I'm using. So I'm using 100 grit sandpaper for a start. Then I'll go back and if I got it smooth and I don't have to add another coat, I'll wet sand it with 220, and then I'll hit it with some primer, wet sand it again, and then paint it. Maybe I won't even go that far. Maybe I'll just prime it and paint it. Not sure. Right, well, I just noticed this area up in here seems pretty darn thin. And since I'm trying to seal a water leak and probably keep as much of this rust away as I possibly can, I'm just gonna hit this with just a tiny bit of filler. And then obviously I'm gonna have to wait for it to cure. So it does take a little bit more time. And then we'll come back and jump on the wet sanding of this to get this smoothed out a little bit more and ready for paint. Still got a little bit of, well, roughness there. So I've got some 500 grit wet sandpaper that I'm just gonna do this section. Remember, all this is under bumpers and not being seen. So this is all for sealing. This is a little bit of beauty, just a wee bit, just enough. I think that's ready for primer. All right, I've finished wet sanding, I've wiped it down, and I'm just gonna say, you can spend hours doing this right, or you can get by and get it good enough, which is what I'm doing here. So don't look at this as how to do bodywork video. Look at this as how to make your car look better and not leak anymore. That's what this is all about. So I could spend a lot more time prepping this. I could use, they have another step as far as filler goes that I could go with a coat of that that fills in all these little gaps and imperfections. I could prime it, I could wet sand it, I could wet sand it again, and make it absolutely smooth and wonderful for a real paint job, but we are just getting by. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in here with some primer now, prime all this out, even the stuff that's behind the bumper, and I'll hit that with some paint just so that I cover all the areas that are there. I don't have any more bare metal. That's the only reason I'm doing it back there. But that should complete our repair. Now before I lay down the primer, as you can see, I've also been working here and sort of hiding it from you the whole time. Reason being, the process was the same as it was there. I didn't have anything to attach the bumper to. This is what the bumper attaches to. When you put the bumper skin on, this is what the bumper actually screws into, and it fastens here. Well, before I went in and did this repair, there was nothing for these fasteners here to go into. And all I did was I came in, I made a template, I drilled some holes, and now, and this is the exact same type of repair I did there. Just took the two pieces of paper and pushed it together. But now, and I drew around this outside with a Sharpie so I could tell where to locate it. And these have screws that lock them into place. Before, the bumper was kind of hanging out. Before, this was also really rusty and crusty. I figured as long as I'm here, I might as well address it. I did, but once again, this is done in a way that is just a few hours. You can spend days doing this right. I spent a few hours making it work, making it so it didn't leak anymore. And also I discovered that there was a large hole here that could contribute to a water leak in the trunk. I did the same thing on the other side, and I believe once we've got it all together, it'll look a little bit better, but more importantly, it'll seal up like it's supposed to. So sorry I hid this from you, but it really wasn't necessary for this video because I still showed you the same process that I used over here. This is just a general purpose primer. I actually wish I would have got some red, but it's okay. Gray is gonna work just fine. You need to put down a surface that's universal that paint will stick to. If not, it's not gonna stick to stuff. One last thing, thin coats of primer. It's okay if you can see through it for the first couple of coats. You put a really thin coat on, let it dry, and then come back and add another coat. If you just sit there and spray and spray and spray, you're gonna get runs all over the place. And I did too much work to have that. One last thing I forgot to mention, I went through with a rag and cleaned everything up before I got to this point. That way I've got a nice surface that is free of dirt and debris. That way the paint, once again, has something to stick to. Preparation is really huge when it comes to painting. One more tip is when you're done spraying with stuff, hold the can upside down and spray it like this for just a couple of seconds, and that will help clear the nozzle of any debris and help prevent those little spots that I just had there. Now once that dries, I'm gonna have to wet sand that. One of the things you'll find when you actually coat it with a coat of primer, I have like a little spitty thing that happened here while I was using the primer. That kind of sucked. I'll have to wet sand that down. But what you'll begin to notice is any of the tiny little imperfections in your body work. Once the surface is uniform, when you're looking at it and it's a whole bunch of different colors and textures, it's difficult to see any imperfections. But once you lay down a coat of primer, you're able to see those things a lot more clearly. But I will wet sand that just because having those drips there after doing all that work kind of sucks. I'm just putting a coat on the inside just to have a coat on the inside. That's all, just to hit some of the rust from the other angle. Actually, I should have got that paper off more, but oh well. None of this will be seen. It's all behind something. Now, if I really gave a crap and wanted to be here all night, I would come back in and fill these little areas in that you can now see that the primer is starting to show. So that you don't see the actual body work. Also over here, it would be a little bit better, but I think it looks 10 times better than the blobs of rust that were there. Also, it's going to be a slightly different color. So one day, if I care to go back and do proper body work on this, fine. Today is not that day. Today is, I'm pretty sure I'm just going to get this done and move on with my life. So we'll let this dry, come back, and I think we'll lay a coat of paint down. I might hit a little more primer in these areas once this dries to try to get a little more uniformity, but I think it's pretty much ready for paint. Well, I've got, 2.5-ish coats of primer on here. I feel that's gonna be sufficient. Now I'm gonna go in with my paint, which, as I said, is likely not an exact match, but it's a similar color red. I'm gonna go with that. My patience for doing body work really isn't there, and body work is not my thing. But I believe sealing up water leaks is, and that's what we're here to do, as I keep saying. All right, let's get some paint on this and call it done. Oh yeah, that's very red. Yeah, it's a very different color red. But just like with the primer, you don't want to lay it all down in one coat. You want to lay down a little coat, and then once you're done, spray the can upside down for a minute just to clear the nozzle. I probably have maybe 50 bucks in this, maybe. Might be closer to 40. So aside from a day's worth of work, have to count that. Otherwise, well, it is what it is. Well, that is red. It looks like my Vigor had a run-in with a fire truck. I feel I sealed my leaks, which is what I came here to do. So now I'm going to sort of put this back together. Here's my ABS sensor, if you were wondering what this was hanging down. It seems like such an achievement to put this in now that it's been off for so long. And that just fastens directly to that fiberglass. And this goes into a plastic clip. It's mounted in there securely. There's a gasket around the outside. These screws lock these into place. Starting to look like a car again. Now, it's time to get this bumper skin back up onto this car. Now, I've already taken the liberty of reattaching the harness for the license plate lights. I just took them out of the back of here just to make things a little bit easier for me. Looks a lot better than it did when I started. All right, before I put the interior of the trunk back together, I'm going to close it up and we're gonna go and test it to see if it has any water leaks still. I know I committed when I put the bumper and everything on, we will be successful. And we're back. Actually, when we finished up shooting the other night, when we got done with the body work, it was actually dark outside and there wasn't really enough light to go out and check for leaks. However, I was fortunate enough, well, I want to call it fortunate, there was a thunderstorm that night and I left the car parked outside, which is just as good of a test, if not a real world test, of whether or not there are still leaks into the trunk. Came out the next morning to find out, yes indeed, there was a little bit of water on both sides of the trunk when I came back. Rather disappointed to find that. I took a closer look and I found that on the driver's side here, the power antenna had begun to leak where the base of the tube for the antenna itself met the actual motor assembly had completely rotted away and water was leaking out of that and into the trunk area. Not wanting to take too much time to rebuild that, and it was really extremely difficult to do, I just replaced it with this whip antenna, which worked just fine, and it was about, I think it was $11 for the part, and it took just minutes to install. In fact, I believe I've done a video on that. On the other side, there was something slightly different that I found. The sunroof drain on that side, coming down through there where it met the quarter panel, was clogged up, and as a result, it caused the water to flow back out into the trunk. So I've since repaired those two supposed leaks. I also checked the sunroof drain on this side to make sure it was doing well.
Now, because the drain tube also has a provision for the drain for the antenna, and I no longer am running that type of antenna, what I did was I just inserted a bolt in the end of it and I held it up high like this so that any water that would come in would have a tendency to keep going out the exit. I also cleaned this side out similar to what I did on the other side, but there's the solution now, and hopefully that will no longer leak.
Now I believe that there are no more leaks into the trunk, so we're going to take it outside, run the hose on it for a while and see if we can make it leak. And if we can make it leak, let's find the source of those leaks. And if we can't, we're going to put it all back together and be done with this project. So come out with us out back. We'll get the garden hose and get a little wet today. I've positioned a camera inside the trunk with you and a light so that you can see. This way you can let me know if there's going to be any leaks into the trunk. I'm going to run the water on the outside here with the hose for a while. So if you see anything leaking into the trunk, let me know, and then also let me know where it is. Hopefully you don't get wet. Simulating a rainstorm. I think that should tell us if we've got any leaks. Okay, now as we can clearly see, the antenna is the thing that's still leaking here. I believe it's just because it's still a little bit loose. Here, to have a look. It's still a little bit loose on its mount. So I'm going to try to tighten it up, and hopefully this seal will seal a little bit better, and we will prevent our leak from happening. Let's give it another try and see if it's leaking. Looks like we got it. Doesn't look like it's leaking back there anymore. It was a lot of effort, but it's paid off in that now we have a dry trunk and we won't have to drive around with an aquarium. Looks like this side looks good. Let's wrap this up. Well, I think it was a good idea to go back and check the work because as you saw, we had that other leak that was still present at the antenna. Not that big a deal to fix. At least it wasn't my body work that leaked, and I'm very happy about that. That's something to keep in mind with this repair. Proper body work requires a lot more work and a lot more patience than I gave to it. I'll put a link in the description to my friend Donnie Smith's channel. You can go there and check out his tutorials on bodywork and glean a little more information from it. In order to do this properly, the best way to do it would be to cut out all the rust and weld in new metal. I didn't have the time or the patience for that. I did what I did, and you know what? My trunk doesn't leak anymore, so that's what I set out to do. How long this repair lasts? Well, that remains to be seen, but I think it will last long enough, and so far it's holding up well. As far as the finish work goes, you can pretty much take that as far as you like. Me, I kind of lost patience after a certain point. The more wet sanding you do, the smoother it will be. Once again, the tip about spraying it with primer to look for imperfections. Sometimes when you've got like different layers of paint and Bondo and things that are on there, it can be kind of confusing. But once you lay that first coat of light primer down, it can reveal all those imperfections that may still be present in your work, and they'll be easier to find that way. So you might consider that as a tip. As far as my technique of the two pieces of paper and smushing them together and making parts with fiberglass, remember, this is not just regular Bondo. This is a fiber strand Bondo, so it's reinforced with fiberglass, which gives it a lot of strength and rigidity over what you would normally get with just standard Bondo. You can actually use fiberglass also. That's a whole different process altogether that I did not cover here. Bodywork is a whole different animal. There's a reason why there's people that just do bodywork and the reason why people that just do repairs. Me, I'm on the repair side. However, this was repairing a water leak. I took it as far as I wanted to take it, and I'm honestly enjoying the outcome. I much prefer looking at this mismatched paint over big bubbles and blobs of rust. I also like having a dry trunk. So, as I said, if you want to know more about how to do bodywork a little more professionally, check out my friend Donnie Smith's channel, and that should get you where you need to be. But for now, I've got to put this thing back together. There was a lot of footage with this. This was hours and hours worth of work just to get to this point. There is some additional footage that will be available over at my website to premium members. There'll be a link in the description if you're interested in that. Otherwise, this covers the basics as far as getting bodywork like this done to get you by. If you have automotive questions, I would ask that you head over to EricTheCarGuy.com. There's a welcome video there to tell you about all the amazing features we have there to help you with those automotive issues, should you have them. If you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. I post repair videos every Friday, so look for me then. And I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. I will see you next time.